Hi, I'm Frank Turner. Don't worry, I'm finite.
To the east, the road beneath my feet.
You know, shopping for Halloween outfits.
Oh yeah, I heard.
So yeah, we got some shit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. I wasn't sure if everybody would be dressed up or not. You never know.
The thing about it is like Halloween's not that big a deal in the UK.
I was wondering.
Yeah, like I mean, I guess if Halloween falls maybe this weekend because there was kind of a weekend with it. You know, people would maybe like some people throw a party at which maybe a third of the people might put in the costume, but people don't really care.
But it's nothing like it is in the US.
Yeah, and I mean we've been here for Halloween a few times now, and sort of we've realised that like people care, and it's fun, you know.
It is,
so
yeah.
we just went to Party City and spent stupid money.
Do you do any like tradition things now that you've been here for a few years doing that?
Yeah, well, I mean, in terms of American traditions, yeah, I mean, we've had a Thanksgiving over here in the States now,
Okay.
which was a really interesting experience for us. We were in, obviously we didn't have a gig on Thanksgiving because
Nobody's gonna come. Everybody comes out the night before.
Right, yeah, so we played the night before and the night after, so we had a day off on Thanksgiving, and a friend of ours lives in New Jersey and invited us over, so we went over and we did, you know, we had turkey with all trimmings, and
Right.
we watched the American football game and had no idea what the fuck was going on. And then, weirdly enough, we ended up at Lou Collar from Sick of It All's house.
Oh really?
Yeah, which was
In
really
Jersey?
in Jersey, and
Oh, wow.
it was really surreal because like we were quite drunk by that point, and
That's
he's
awesome.
obviously straight edge.
That sounds like a pretty awesome Thanksgiving.
Yeah, it was. I was thankful for being a Sick of It All fan.
Right. Well, when I introduced you in the first place, I don't know how I would introduce you as far as your genre. I don't know. You kind of transcend genre.
Well, thank you. I'll take that as a compliment.
Absolutely.
I mean, I often feel that genre descriptions exist. They serve a purpose when you're talking about music that not everybody in the room has heard.
Right.
And once they have, who gives a shit? You know
That's
what I
right.
mean?
I think like folk punk are the things that I hear the most.
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
describe it.
I think that's right. But then, I mean, you know, at the same time, I think that like one of my bigger influences in recent years has been stuff like The National and The Whole Steady and a lot of indie rock stuff like
Right.
that.
So you started out in England. You grew up in England,
Mm-hmm.
and you were in a band called Million Dead, and then that's when you went solo about a decade ago, right? It's been over 10 years now, and so how has touring changed since the beginning when you?
Well, I mean, in many ways. I mean, it's funny, like, the sort of progress of my career on the road was non-linear at the beginning in a way that is quite confusing in retrospect. By which I mean, essentially, we reached a certain level with Million Dead where we were playing to like 500 people a show kind of thing. And then we broke up, and I went back to playing to like no people a show and started touring just on my own, like on the train with like a rucksack and a guitar case, you know, and sort of went right back to kind of brass tacks. And in my head, it sort of feels like that period of time should have come before the Million Dead era, but it didn't.
Right. Like,
But-
if you went backward, kind of a building backwards. In a
Yeah,
way.
it's a little bit jumbled up. But I mean, in the experience of going from being medium popular in a very underground way to back to zero again was I think quite useful for me on a personal level, and it made me quite sort of self-reliant and kind of determined, and also hopefully kind of humble and grateful for what I have. At least that's the intention.
You definitely seem humble when you're on stage. I'll say that, but
I'll do my best.
like I read your book and it's fantastic, and I love the progression from, you know, sleeping on floors, playing, you know, wherever you can, to, you know, selling out Wembley, and I like that you finished it on the 1,000th show. That's a hard word to say.
Yeah.
1,000th show. And
Yeah.
what's your number tonight? Do you know?
Tonight is 1,971.
Oh wow! So you're coming up on another milestone.
Yeah, we've got a show booked for that actually. We're playing my favourite venue in the world, which is a place called Nottingham Rock City.
Okay.
And we are playing there on December 15.
Well,
And it's
that's
going to be a
awesome.
party. There's people coming from all over the world for
That's
that
great.
one, so
Did you ever think you'd get to 2,000?
Yeah, well, no. I mean, the thing is, I sort of didn't really give a shit about counting shows at the beginning,
Right.
and like, there's something. This is something that's been just slightly playing on my mind lately with this build-up to show 2000. Is that like a couple of people have asked the question like, what number do you think you'll get to?
Right.
And that's a really
That's a
really sort of existentialist question, because it's essentially asking me how long I think I'm going to live, or at the very least, it's asking me how long I think I'm going to be able to sustain playing music for a living.
Right.
Both of which are kind of the sort of questions that I don't want to think about very much.
Well, I think that's what you just said. I feel like touches on to like the core of what you present in your music. Like that's just you. This is your life, and like this is what you do.
Yeah.
And you say, how many shows am I going to play? As many as I can until I die.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, I mean, obviously there are limitations on it. You know, if I reach a point where everybody hates what I do, then that might be restrictive. But I feel enormously fortunate to do what I do for a living, and I love it, and I don't want to stop. I mean, I was having this conversation just now with Will Varley, who's opening tonight's show, and Will's a good friend of mine. He's a little younger than me, and like, you know, this is our 5th show in a row, and these days doing 5 shows in a row is like tough.
Yeah.
And partly it's because we play longer shows and more physical shows than we used to, but partly it's because we're getting old. You know, Nigel, my drummer, is 45 years old. I'm 34. Like, and we were discussing, like, I think the longest stretch we did with that day off was 17.
17, wow.
And that was in 2010, and I couldn't do that now. I physically couldn't do it, and like I say, that's an interesting sort of thing to think about as well. And then you look at, like, I was reading the other day about Iron Maiden, who remain one of my favourite bands, and apparently they do day on, day off is their schedule.
One on, one off every day.
One on, one off. And I mean, I think that would probably bum me out a bit, because I'm not sure that I could get into the swing of the show.
Groove, right?
Yeah, but I mean, you know, it's like we generally do 3 on, 1 off these days, and that's kind of, that's
seems like a good
pretty
rhythm.
comfortable.
I know by reading your book, you used to kind of just, when you were on tour, you would take the day off and play a solo show by yourself.
Yeah.
So like that's like things have rolled to it. It comes to a
Yeah,
different
I mean,
level
it's,
now,
let's say
right?
it's physical. Like, I mean, partly it's to do with my voice. I've actually had a rough voice for the last few days. I'm coming out of it now, which is thank God. But yeah, you know, I have to be careful about that shit now in a way that I didn't when I was in my 20s. But I mean, that's just the nature of the human body.
That's how it goes. Yeah. So basically, this is a show about traveling, and you know, so I mean, I wanted to get some of the general stuff out of the way as well, but mostly I kind of want to talk about your life traveling, and like, so when did you first kind of realize, what was the first place you traveled to that made you think, like, this is something that I want to be able to do? Was it more the music driving the travel, or was it the travel was, I know from the book you've mentioned, like, you would take any show anywhere just because you'd never been to this part of Europe? Or
sure. I think I'm going to answer that question in quite a long roundabout way, if you don't mind.
No, absolutely.
Like, I think to me, punk rock, the thing that I love about the idea of punk rock is the idea of self-creation. The idea that you can consciously decide what type of person you are rather than just accepting whatever the universe throws at you. You know, and that's the common thread to me that links Laura Jane Grace and Henry Rollins, you know what I mean? That idea that you just decide to be who you're going to be. When I was a kid, I'm not sure that I was particularly given to travelling. When I was a young kid, I was quite sort of nervous, quite sort of homebound, not particularly adventurous. And I definitely sort of took a decision when I got into this music, which was so radically different from anything I knew as a kid, and then the sort of philosophy and the lifestyle that came with it, and I took a sort of conscious decision that I was going to do something interesting with my life, you know, and not just kind of wander, sort of not just kind of sleepwalk into the kind of person that my parents wanted me to be.
Right.
You know, particularly with the schooling that I had, because I got a scholarship to a very exclusive school when I was a kid, and there's a kind of like a bobsleigh run that takes you from there very easily into a certain type of life,
Right.
and I didn't want that. So I mean, I did a bit of traveling when I was younger, where I went to Africa and I went to Southeast Asia as a kid, like with my girlfriend. I'd like work summer jobs for a few months, save up some money, and then go out and do that. That I kind of had mixed feelings about, because I felt very sort of like pretentious and touristy, just being kind of like a sort of white Western backpacker, kind of bumming around hostels in Vietnam and shit. And
Right.
it just kind of, I'm not saying that I'm opposed to that method of existence, but like a lot of the people I'm with that sort of had this really highfalutin opinion of themselves as sort of not being tourists, and I'm like,
Right.
you're tourists. we are tourists. That is what we are.
Yeah.
A big turning point for me was reading Get in the Van by Henry Rollins, which is his tour diaries of the Black Flag years, which were very kind of hard and hand to mouth, and that was a moment of me kind of going, oh shit, that's what I want to do. And in the summer of '98, I did my first tour with a band called Knee Jerk that I was in when we were all 16 years old. And we knew one guy who was 21 who could drive the van, so he drove the van.
Is this a rental?
No, he owned a piece of shit van. We didn't really know him, and he was a very strange individual. We just
Okay.
and we did 2 weeks around the UK. We booked all the shows ourselves from a payphone, you know, and it was it was sort of just about pre the internet. Do you know what I mean? I mean, the internet existed, like there was AOL chat rooms and stuff,
Right.
but it was like pre MySpace. And,
It's not get on the phone on you all the time.
yeah, no one had sat nav. I mean, like I remember before going on tour, we got one of the pieces of advice we got given was like, if you can't find the venue, drive to the shitty end of town and look for someone wearing a leather jacket and ask them. And we did that more than once, and it worked. But like so. That tour was definitely, I think, the moment when I caught the bug, because I think about 12 of us went on the tour, and when we got home, about 6 people went, "Fuck that! I'm never leaving home ever again."
Right.
Because like this tour was pretty disastrous. We lost money. No one came to the shows. We all got sick. You know what I mean?
It's the first tour. What do you
Yeah, and like, and so half the people came home being like, "That was a utter calamity," and half of us came home going, "When do I go again?"
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And just right from then on, I just kind of knew that was what I wanted to do.
I think that's what like sets people apart, the people who get into that situation and they thrive on that chaos versus the people who just,
Yeah,
need
definitely.
the comfort of home.
Well, one of the things about touring that I love and that is really, in terms of what it's done to my personality and my character, is that it makes you incredibly hands-on. Like, something's gone wrong, you got to fix it now.
Right.
You can't do that thing of kind of hoping that mum and dad are going to fix it, or sitting on your sofa and umming and ahhing about it for a week, or just sort of making do. If your fucking van breaks down, you've got a show tonight here and you've got another show the following night tomorrow, you got to fucking fix it
Right.
now.
So you become self-reliant.
Yeah, you learn. I had a car accident in Lithuania one time, and like we had to figure that shit out. Do you know what I mean? We didn't even speak Lithuanian. It's like, fuck it, we've got to do something. So, and it just makes you very kind of resourceful and self-reliant.
Right, that's great. So, what's your average day on the road like now versus like what it was like before?
The thing, okay, so that book that I wrote was about the early years of touring for me. It's
Right.
about going from playing in bars to playing at my first arena show. And people have been asking if I'm going to write a follow-up, and I mean, I'm not going to say no, definitely, but it's a lot harder to justify because my life on the road is a lot less chaotic and a lot more regimented now, and that's how it has to be in order to achieve all the things I want to achieve. But like, so I generally wake up at about like 10. We sleep on the bus, so I generally wake up at the venue, get up, find somewhere for coffee and brunch kind of thing,
Right.
catch up on email and work, and like any kind of like writing and recording that I'm trying to do some press, do a sound check, have dinner, do the show, and then I generally like, again, my days of kind of going wild after the show are kind of behind me now.
Yeah.
I generally have like a glass of wine and go to bed after the show these days, maybe do a bit of reading.
So
But I mean, although having said that, today is a roadie Friday. And roadie Friday means it's the day before a day off.
oh, okay.
So we have a day off in Albany, New York tomorrow. So tonight there will be drinking.
There will be a little party going on.
Yeah, a little party
You living
somewhere.
up the Delaware scene?
Yeah, well, I've never been to Delaware before, so this is my first ever.
This is your
time.
first Delaware show?
First ever Delaware show.
I'm from Jersey, but welcome to
Oh,
Delaware.
okay, well there we go. Oh, we just had an amazing cab driver who told me about Delaware. The only thing I ever knew about Delaware before was that it was where Boy Sets Fire are from. They were
Oh yeah,
one of my favorite
I
bands.
used to see them like with like Thursday and people with
Yeah.
basements in Jersey. Yeah,
Well,
was
they were
good
from
times.
here.
Yeah.
My first proper show was opening for Boy Sets Fire
Oh really?
in London. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
on their first.
I remember reading something about it and remember that was your first actual show.
Yeah.
That's great. When you have a day off or something, what do you do with your days off?
Well, I mean, again, like sort of, we tend to have earned our days off by the time they roll around. So we have a thing, we call it Slut Life.
Yeah.
And it's basically means you get up in the morning, and generally we have a hotel room on a day off.
Okay.
So tomorrow morning I'm going to get up, I'm going to get into my hotel room, and I'm just going to like just kind of die in the bed for most of the day. Do you know what I mean? It's like Netflix, room service, like just little boring shit like charging stuff.
Right.
So I'm recharging my toothbrush, my Kindle.
Just being able to.
Yeah, or just remembering to, you know what I mean?
Right.
And just really sort of like purging. I read a lot when I'm on the road, and that's a big thing for me. So, I do catch up on my reading, and then write, and like I've got the facilities to demo new songs and stuff as well. So that's part of it too.
Okay, great. While you're on that, do you have any like favorite books you've read recently, or?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to read a lot of travel literature. I read a lot of political and economic theory, and I read a lot of history. My new kind of resolution at the moment is to try and read more fiction.
Okay.
Because I just get so into dry theory. I mean, actually, this morning I finished Larry Siedentrop's History of the Development of Western Individualism, which was fascinating, and advanced a theory about the Renaissance that I was not previously aware of. So that was cool. But yeah, I mean, I've been really into stuff like Paul Theroux and Patrick Leigh Fermor. WG Sebald and that kind of like sort of, do you know what I mean? Ryszard Kapuscinski, stuff like that, sort of travel writing kind of vibe, travel journalism. I read a book recently called The Zanzibar Chest by Aidan Hartley that was about being a foreign correspondent in Africa during the 1980s. That was one of the best books I've read in years.
Sounds great.
So I love that stuff, but I mean, I read it for the prose as much as anything else, the prose style. Like W.G. Sebald's the greatest prose stylist who's ever lived, in my opinion. It's a mixture of that kind of stuff.
Do you get into like in podcasts or documentaries?
You know, I watch a few documentaries on Netflix and stuff like that. The whole podcast thing is like, I haven't really figured out how you go about it yet, and I'm sort of trying. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
It's playing Rosanna, by the way. I try and get in. I haven't got into podcasts. I'm sort of trying to keep it that way, just because I sort of have little enough time for listening to music as it is.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I don't want to sort of my listening time. I want to
take your plate time when you have.
Yeah, you know, there's not enough time in the day as it is. So I know that there's some good podcast stuff out there, but I just
it is kind of a rabbit hole though. If you start,
you know,
start to go down.
Yeah, I've got time enough for reading and a little bit of listening to music as it is, and that's kind of
that's fair.
That's that for me.
So to talk about like perception of what travel life is like. So does your family and friends? I mean, you've been doing this for long enough now. They might have a better idea, but are there any misconceptions people have about your life versus what it's really like out there?
Yeah, absolutely, huge ones. I mean, I'm constantly reminding not so much my mum anymore, but a lot of my relations that like I'm not on holiday, like I'm working when I'm out here, and it's like, you know, people, not only that, but it's like, I mean, one of the things that I'm constantly explaining to people, my email address is public domain, and people email me about stuff all the time, and it's all in good spirit, and I'm not trying to be a dick about it, but it's like, oh no, there's really cool places like 20 miles away, and I'm like, if it's not walking distance from the venue, I'm not going.
Right.
Like, I don't have the time or the facility. Once the bus is parked, it's parked. We can't really make stops places, and like, I've just got enough shit to do with my day, with keeping up with correspondence, trying to write, and then just the show, you know. And I think the other thing, something that like, one of the major misconceptions that pisses me off is people who think that like it's what I do is easy.
Yeah.
That's a different statement saying that what I do is fortunate. What I do is incredibly fortunate. I love what I do. I'm incredibly grateful and lucky to do what I do, and I thank the fates every morning that I get to do what I do for a living. But for the record, it's fucking hard, and like particularly at this stage of my life, like there are not many people who make it past 30 and continue to be full-time touring people. Not just musicians, but crew as well. Like this is rough on your constitution. It's rough on like every part of you physically and mentally, and your socially, relationships at home, all that kind of shit. It's like it's not easy, and I'm not asking for sympathy or for like plaudits for that, but if people could stop telling me that what I do is a fucking doddle and a breeze, that would be nice.
Just gotta set the record straight.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? I saw a great interview with Dave Grohl actually, where somebody told him that what he did was easy, and he just went, "Cool, you be Dave Grohl, go." Like fuck you. You know what I mean? It's like it's particularly the physical side of it and the emotional side of it. It's extremely taxing, and like I've lived through a number of what I think of like die-offs. Like the first one was what we were talking about earlier. That first tour we came back, half the people didn't want to go out on tour again. Then the second one is like it's very common for people to be in a band up until about the age of about 24, 25, and then they go fuck this and they go and get a real job.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It's totally fine. And then I'm in the middle of experiencing the third kind of extinction event of my career, which is sort of early to mid 30s. The number of people I know who've just gone, fuck this, I want to have a steady income, I want to get married, I want to have children, I want to have a career, whatever. Like so many people do that, and again, that's totally fine and legit. I've had crew members who I've been with for 10 years who've gone home. I know a lot of bands who I'm friends with who've split up or gone completely scaled back what they're doing. Again, totally legit. Personally, I'm well, and that's the thing. I was about to say I'm a lifer, but fuck, I don't know. maybe I'm gonna get 2 more years down the line and go fuck it, I quit. But like certainly for now, it's like I'm into this.
You never know. But you brought up two things that I wanted to ask about. The fact that this is a job. You're working on the road. So where do you find time? Do you spend most of the time on the bus to write, both when you wrote your book and when you write new music?
Yeah, on the bus, in dressing rooms, in cafes. Like, there's time. There's a sort of. It's a weird sort of duality. There's a sort of cliche about touring, which is broadly true about the stereotype is hurry up and wait. And there can be a lot of dead time on the road. which can be very frustrating. I mean, personally, I sort of refuse to accept that idea, and you can fill that time, and I try very hard to fill it with either reading and educating and listening to music, or with writing my own stuff, you know. And I have like a pile of notebooks and a laptop and recording devices and guitars.
I think that tends to set people like you apart from like people who are willing to take that as free downtime versus the people who keep on grinding and keep working, keep educating themselves and things. And like the people that I admire, like you, that like are willing to push that extra mile and want to keep bettering yourself.
Yeah, I think I kind of my entire philosophy of life, to the extent that I have a coherent one, is driven by sort of kind of like outrage at the idea that I'm going to die. You know what I mean? And of course that's ridiculous, because no one was promised anything when they came into this world.
Right.
And you get what you get, and you should make the most of it. But it's just like, fuck, you mean that time runs out eventually? And as I increasingly get older, not just that, but physically I'm not going to be able to do certain things after a certain point, blah, blah, blah. And my personal reaction to that is to go, fuck, get on with it,
Just
man.
do it now while you
like,
can.
yeah, Jesus Christ,
No, I feel the same way.
book more tours. Like, fuck. You know, it's funny, like there was a time when my mum used to kind of be concerned about my well-being and used to have a go at like my manager for making me work hard, and and my manager Charlie, who's a dear friend of mine, would be like, it's not me, it's him, fucking hell. So.
Well, the other thing you mentioned, that the keeping relationships, so both friends and like romantic relationships, how do you maintain those, or don't you? Or is it hard?
Well, I mean, the thing, I feel like I've long since passed the sort of the winnowing point, if you know what I mean, like the threshing. Just because like anybody who I have a friendship with now has got to be somebody who I can sustain a friendship with in a long distance and episodic kind of way.
Right.
And you know, that's just how it is and how it's been for a long time. And yeah, it's funny, there's this thing of tour friendships. One of the things I love about music festivals is it's like a sort of gathering of the tribes, and you walk around backstage at Reading or Riot Fest or whatever, and you're like, fuck yeah, man, I saw you in 2010 at Social Detour, I saw you and Jason Isbell this summer, you know, and just kind of, you cross paths with people,
right,
and in a really lovely way. And then romantically, I mean, it's hard. I'm in the middle of trying to work something that's really important to me right now, and it's going well. I'm
Good.
pleased to say.
Good to hear.
But it's one of those things where, like, when we got together, the deal was very clear.
Okay.
And again, I think it takes a certain type of person to date a musician, not just in terms of the amount of time, but trust is a huge issue as well. You know, you can get laid on tour if you want to get laid on tour. It's doable, you know, you have to. And I mean, a big part of that for me is there's no fucking point in even trying unless you're actually gonna mean it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Put yourself all into it.
Yeah, you know, it takes a lot of time and effort. If you're then just gonna go and fuck around, what's the point? You know?
Right. From where you started, like riding around in cars. Also, I'm a huge fan of Jonah Matranga, and I didn't realize until I read your book that you had toured with him. Like,
yeah,
through
we
Texas.
toured together a long time ago. Yeah.
But like, so you got to get together with your friends and tour when you were younger, or when you were first starting out doing solo stuff, or you would mix and match kind of friends and people that were on your label. And how has that like evolved and changed? Do you still get to go on tour with people you're friends with, or is it more like
yeah? I mean, generally, when I'm headlining, I mean, I always pick my support acts, and that's a point of pride for me. Partly because I feel responsible for an evening's entertainment, and I want to put on good bands, and partly because the way I came up was other people taking me out. You know, and in fact, that is still the case. We still do opening slots with people, and that's just kind of how it's meant to be. You know what I mean? So, yeah. So I mean, you know, Will Varley. I mean, it's kind of there's a crossover essentially. Will's a friend of mine. I met him because I saw him play a show and he destroyed me emotionally. And I think he's one of the greatest writers alive. But we're friends as well. I mean, he just came costume shopping with me just then, and he was hungover to all mother of balls, and I laughed at him, and I bought him a Friar Tuck outfit that he's going to wear tonight.
That's going to be great.
And then, so yeah, there's that. I mean, you know, I think that bands tend to make friends easily. I mean, I think there are bands out there who sort of live up to the Motley Crue stereotype thing. I don't come across them very often. They don't seem to inhabit my corner of music. I have done here and there, but I've immediately gone the other way. You know what I mean? Like, I think that there's a quote which I can't remember the exact wording of from Joe Strummer about punk rock being about good manners.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly I find that in my experience, bands who either are in the punk scene or have come from the punk scene tend to be decent people for the most part.
I'm sure like as far as friends go, even if you didn't know anyone to begin with, like this scene is a big community, and like the bands you tour with and the people you see on the tour.
Yeah, reputation matters a lot in this world as well. Do you know what I mean? And like bands do come along every now and again who are dickheads, and everybody tends to know it pretty fast.
Right.
And
word gets around, I'm sure.
Yeah, and like I don't want it to be too sort of gossip related, but it's a bit kind of like, you know, if somebody's a fucking prick, you generally hear about it, and those people tend to not get offered tours.
Let's see. So I have a few like quick rapid fire sort of things. So if you could tour with anyone alive or dead, who would you tour with?
Fugazi.
Nice.
Or Fugazi or the band.
Right.
Nice. And that kind of encapsulates my music taste right there.
Fugazi or the band.
Yeah.
So, and do you have any like mementos, anything you get in every city you go to, any picture you take in every place, anything like that?
I've got into a habit lately. I've got two things I collect. I collect St. Christopher's, which is something I collect myself. I go to thrift stores when I mean, not like religiously every city, because there's a lot of generic cheap ones. But like, we were in Birmingham, Alabama earlier this year, and I found a dashboard magnet St. Christopher medal that was really sort of like awesomely kind of 1920s. I mean, it was like when the dashboards were just metal. Right. You know what I mean? So I picked that up, and that made me really happy.
Are they like regional?
Some of them are, yeah. I mean, I always wear one. I mean, I'm not a religious person at all, but I guess I'm arguably superstitious to a degree. And St. Christopher's saint of travel. So it's interesting. Like Orthodox countries do less St. Christophering. It's much more of a Catholic thing than an Orthodox thing. So Eastern Europe, they're harder to find. They don't really know who he is.
Okay.
But you know, you can find. I found a fantastic one in Hungary Cathedral that I was very happy with.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
I like that.
And then the other one, and I actually got one of these last night. There's a whole culture of in the military and like the services over here of coins. Do you know about these?
No.
So like in the army and the navy, but also like firefighters and the cops and that kind of thing over here, you have these coins that they have that are like service coins.
Okay.
And there's this whole. So this is Naval Medical Center, Portsmouth, Virginia, presented by the commanding officer for excellence, first and finest. But they have this whole system whereby everybody has a coin, and if you go into a bar and then you challenge somebody on their coin, and if you challenge somebody and they've got their coin with them and they put it on the bar, you have to buy the drinks. But if they don't have the coin, then they have to buy the drinks. And that's kind of the way it works. And I mean, I've never been army, military in any way, navy, air force, or indeed firefighting. I'm pathetically ill-suited to that line of work. But it's a really cool little thing. And my first one I got was a Florida firefighter gave me a coin in 2009, I think it was.
Oh, wow.
And now I guess I've got about 20 of these now. But like, I love them. I think they're super cool.
That is a really cool thing.
How
often have you been challenged?
Well, the thing is, I don't really get challenged because I'm not really supposed to have one.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I mean, I guess I could challenge somebody else, but that would be kind of a dick move, given that I'm not actually in any kind of services. But it's a nice thing to have at home, and it's just sort of like my sister's in the army. You know, I have a lot of respect for people who serve in that way, and it's a really kind of special thing to me.
Okay, that's awesome. If you weren't touring all the time, I know like you still have a residence in London? Or
I do now. I didn't for a long time actually. For about 9 years, I just surfed and I wasn't touring, but I've got an apartment now.
Okay, so if you had to live anywhere, if you weren't on tour, do you think you would stay in London or would anywhere else?
My major hobby outside of music is London history.
Okay.
I walk around London. I'm fascinated by London. I want to know everything about London and never will because it's
the history is huge.
Yeah, it's 2,500 years of being a wild city. So, but yeah, I am particularly, in fact, I can be more specific than that. I would live in N7 in North London, which is an area that I'm deeply wedded to.
Okay. Well, that brings me to another thought that I had was what's the what are the difference between traveling and being in the U.S. versus the U.K. where you're from, versus like say Eastern Europe or Asia, some places you don't know that well.
Yeah, well, they're all different. I mean, America is a unique case. I love America. America is a society that's built for traveling, for movement. You know, just everything, the construction, the freeways, the price of gas, it's sort of built for touring in a way that I really like. I love America and American culture, but it's America's an invented society. You know, it's a consciously invented society, which isn't really true of anywhere else in the world. And if I had to live somewhere other than UK, I'd definitely live in America.
Yeah,
unquestionably.
Any place in particular? Because it's much bigger
I can
than the
think
UK,
of a few. I mean, well, that's one of the things. When growing up in the UK, there's an awful lot of people who have opinions about America who've never been, or maybe they went to New York for a weekend or something. And I'm proud of the fact that I've seen a lot of this country, you know. And like tonight, ticking off Delaware is my 45th state.
Okay.
So, you know, I mean, I love Oregon a lot. I love Texas a lot, actually. I have Texas tattoo.
Oh, nice.
I mean, the kind of the sort of west and the northwest, like the whole kind of. If I wanted to live outside of a city, I'd live in like Idaho or Oregon or Montana or something like that.
Idaho is beautiful.
Yeah, I have a friend who moved to Boise actually, and he has an idyllic life. My sister lived in Colorado for a long time, and that was pretty cool. But I mean, I love it. New York's great. New York's killer. Chicago's killer. Actually, I think I'd probably die if I lived in Chicago because all that ever happens to me in Chicago is I get fucked up with my sketchy Chicago friends.
So, a lot of Irish drinkers in there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bar in Chicago called the G-Man Tavern, and I, honest to God, have never remembered leaving it.
Wow. So on the subject of the UK, I wanted to ask you what do you think has the Brexit, which I mean it's just fun to say, but it seems like a terrible idea from most people's perspective at this point. But do you think
apart from the majority of people in the UK,
well, that majority that isn't like, but what I've read, I don't know for sure, but I have friends who live there, and from what I've read and heard, that a lot of people are kind of regretting that decision. And
I think a lot of people who wanted people to vote in want people to now regret having voted out. It's an interesting thing. I'm very undecided about the issue myself, but the fact remains that more people voted for Brexit than anything else in the history of the UK. So it's,
well, I guess there's that.
Yeah, you know, but I mean by several orders of magnitude. So it, you know,
I'm curious if our election here is going to be similar that way.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the thing. I slightly kind of. A lot of people want to compare Trump and Brexit. I obviously think Trump's a piece of shit. I'm not a huge fan of the Clintons either, but I think it's important that Trump doesn't get elected.
I agree.
I don't think that Trump and Brexit are relatable, because I think that Brexit for most people was a vote of principle, which is that essentially prior to Brexit, well, we haven't had Brexit yet, but the United Kingdom is subject to EU law, which is not electable. That you can't vote against people who pass laws over you. Okay. We have a president we didn't vote for, we have a commission we didn't vote for, we have a parliament that can't veto or pass laws.
Right.
That, to me, and the history of Britain has been a history of democratisation, a history of people standing up to the people who would pass laws over them, and I think Brexit's very much in keeping with that.
Okay.
Is one way of looking at it. But on the flip side, I do think that there's been a rise in anti-immigrant sentiment, which I find very depressing. You know, I'm furiously pro-immigration everywhere and at all times. You know, and we're a nation of immigrants as much as anybody else. I mean, everybody is, really.
Right, of course.
So it's a difficult one, that one. I mean, psephological logic points to Trump losing the election over here. Well, that said,
fingers crossed.
Psephological logic's had a bit of a battering in recent.
Yeah, logic in general. Doesn't seem to be working out. It's a scary fucking
time to be alive, man.
I agree.
I think one of the things that hopefully, the optimist in me thinks that I'm very much like an aggressive centrist in my politics, like a liberal centrist, and I think that you know, the old curse may live in interesting times. I'm hoping that this current sort of spasm of insanity might remind a lot of people that politics being centrist and boring is a good thing. Yeah. You know what I mean?
When it gets like this is what...
Yeah, you know, it's like, I think it's making a lot of people nostalgic for, like, I mean, in the UK, most people I know are nostalgic for the Blair years, even though we furiously marched against Tony Blair at the time. It was like shit, you know?
It's all relative, right? So the last quick one, do you have any like tricks you do on the road, or any let's say, even if you don't do them now as much because you have more regimented, you have a bus, you stay at hotels every few days, but like back in the day when you were in the car, places to get showers, or... Oh yeah, I mean, we used to do shit like there's an all-you-can-eat restaurant, you send two people in, one of them's a bubbly personality, the other one wears a hat pulled down low, and then you trade out people in the bathroom with the hat wearer, and you can feed 12 people for the price of 2. Wow. I'm very good at making a pillow out of shoes and a jacket, and I used to have this coat I toured with, which is a really big puffy parka jacket with a big hood, and if you put your feet in the hood and then pull it up, it was kind of a sleeping bag. Oh, wow. So I used to sleep in that a lot. Those are great. But I mean, I don't have to do that shit as much these days. Right. I have saved Google Map searches for like coffee
diners, that kind of shit.
So you don't have to like eat, well, it's Halloween, so you can just get one costume that zips all the way up and just send the same person in and out.
Yeah,
at the buffet today.
Yeah, that would work. Well, I mean, the thing is that part of me feels bad about doing that shit now.
No,
I mean, we tend to do it in chain restaurants.
So, what's the best travel advice anybody else has given you? This could be specific to tour or just traveling in general.
I can think of, I mean, I'm not sure if there's one humdinger. I mean, in terms of appreciating a city you're in, look up.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and if you want to learn about the history of a city and the architecture and that kind of thing, and like that was a huge thing for me when I first started investigating like London history. It was look at the tops of buildings, not just the ground floor, because that's where the history is in London. Because all the ground floors are just like chain stores and restaurants and shit.
Right.
You want to see where the building is, you look up.
What's
So
this?
that was cool. I mean, drink a lot of water. You know, I had a tour manager called Jimmy P, who's still one of my favorite people in the whole world. And he just had a thing. He said, drink a whole bottle of water before you get up, and a whole bottle of water before you go to bed.
That's a good advice in general.
And and it makes your life, like I say, you know, the physicality of what I do, because I'm essentially an athletic performer,
Right.
And I'm a singer, and I'm also, you know, there is alcohol on the road too, and it's like the combination of those three takes its toll. And
Especially on hydration.
yeah, staying hydrated, it's a
Yeah.
really good shout.
Right. If you were to give anybody a recommendation, if they had one place they could travel, what's your favorite place to travel to? Where would you suggest?
Oh Lord. Well, I mean, for anyone from Europe, I'd say America. I'd say stop fucking having opinions about America without having been here. Do you know what I mean? And don't, as much as I love them, don't just go to like San Francisco and New York.
Right.
Like, go to Texas, go to Ohio, go to the South, go to Memphis. You know,
Yeah.
see the States. It's a wonderful and unique and interesting thing. Beyond that, I mean, I don't know, just try and go somewhere you haven't been. You know, I try and do that as much as I can.
Absolutely.
No one's ever going to see everywhere.
No, as much as we try.
Yeah.
And finally, this is what I wanted to close on. So, what is home, and where is home, or what is the idea of home to you?
You know, I sort of like, I had very conflicted ideas about that for a long time. I wrote an album called England Keep My Bones, and a large part of that was me wrestling with the idea of what constituted home for me. And for a time, my sense of national identity was tickled, if you like, by the fact that I didn't have anywhere specific in England that was home, but that I toured internationally a lot, quite often on my own, and then I'd come to England and I'd feel like I was home.
Okay.
So that made me think about that. I mean, I'm very cautiously not a nationalist, or indeed a patriot particularly, you know, but I do think there is such thing as national identity, and I found that interesting. But having said all that, 4 years ago when I finally got my own place, I got a place in Holloway in North London, which is where I used to live when I last had a place. It's where Nambuka, the bar where I started playing music,
Right.
is based. It's where my dad's family's from. It's where my dad's family still lives collectively. And I just I remember like getting back after I got the place and moved my record collection in, and then I went on the next tour and I got home to that place and I got to Holloway, and I remember going, fucking hell, this is my home. Like, for the first time in a really powerful way, I was like, Holloway is home. So
It's nice to have a physical place for.
yeah, and not necessarily just the flat, but just the area. It was just walking around Holloway. It was like, man, aliens could abduct me and probe the shit out of me and drop me anywhere in the zip code N7, and I would know exactly where I was.
That's great.
And that's a great feeling.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks very much for doing this.
Thank
I really
you.
appreciate it.
Cheers. Thanks a lot.